create a platform where I can intersect advocacy work for the most marginalized communities from like a spiritual and very realist perspective where it's not from a biased perspective. I really see the empathic realist as being able to see things through an unbiased lens, right? Because I've done my own inner work, my own inner healing when it comes to being a woman, being a Black woman, just all the different identities I hold. I had to really dig deep to heal that within myself first before I even came about understanding what the empathic realist was. And so it's a way to really call about the injustices, to call out the injustices, and then create cross-racial, cross-cultural solidarity and communities so that we can have conversations to understand that there are other possibilities.
Welcome to the Mystics Rising podcast. I'm so excited to share with you today Shani Nicole, the Empath Realist. I came across her actually in a clubhouse room and was just deeply inspired by her wisdom and her voice and what she has to share in the world. And most of her work comes from what we talk about a lot on the show, wholeness and our inner work. And a lot of what Shani is bringing into the world is this intersection between spirituality and advocacy. And a lot of what we talk about on the show is how deeply important our own inner work, regardless of where you are. There are cultural, family, societal constructs that are creating different identities that we are living through either consciously or unconsciously, and it's our responsibility to heal that. And until we are doing this inner work and coming from a place of grounded, centered, deep inner listening, it's really hard to step into a very charged environment that's needed and happening in advocacy work. And so I hope you all enjoy this conversation. It really goes through the decolonization, the capitalism, the emphasis of capitalism, cultural, and the cultural shadows that many different marginalized groups are facing, and some different ways to really tap into coming home on your inner journey. And so I want to encourage everyone to check out the show notes, where you can find different ways to get in touch with Shani and hear more about what she's bringing forth into the world, or to partner with her on different work. So hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, Shani, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. And I guess what's most alive in me is your story about coming into you often, I want to say, is it your pen name or like your calling maybe to be the empathic realist?
Empathic realist.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Like, what is that?
Yeah, so the empathic realist, basically, it's something I created um maybe now, like, I don't know, like 3 years ago. It came after a time of like, I mean, after my dad like unexpectedly passed away, and I ended up getting into like a very complicated marriage situation, and there was just a lot of other stuff going on, and I was seeing all the racial and social injustice happening around me, and especially living in New York City, like, you see it almost unfortunately on a daily basis. And then I experienced, family members going into the prison industrial complex and like unjustly. And so, one day, I don't know, I feel like my guides, my ancestors, they downloaded it to me, because I just was like, I want to create a platform where I can intersect advocacy work for the most marginalized communities from like a spiritual and very realist perspective where it wasn't it's not from a biased perspective. I really see the empathic realist as being able to see things through an unbiased lens, right? Because I've done my own inner work, my own inner healing when it comes to being a woman, being a Black woman, just all the different identities I hold. I had to really dig deep to heal that within myself first before I even came about understanding what the empathic realist was. And so it's a way to really call about the injustices, to call out the injustices, and then create cross racial, cross cultural solidarity and communities so that we can have conversations to understand that there are other possibilities, right? Like that's
Mm.
it in a nutshell.
That's a beautiful nutshell, and there's like a lot in there.
Yes.
You know, like I love that this is coming from what I would call like a place of wholeness. Like
Mhm.
where when you talk about the different identities that we kind of fragment ourselves to fit into these boxes, which is part of being human. And then we kind of wake up to this place of, oh, like I need to integrate and almost metabolize like the unhealthy parts of that and the gifts that are in each one of those little boxes. And so I have like a lot of curiosity on what was that path like, and how is that healing, um, and I'm like so curious about like, well, how are you helping host these conversations, and what is the platform looking like today? So,
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to identities, like when I was seeing all of these things happening, that's what prompted me to go back to school to get a second degree in colonial studies, which I just graduated last September. Um, and I think going back to school, and then actually I traveled to different places that were either homes of the colonizers, as I call them, which is parts of Europe, or going to other parts of the world that were colonized. And I think all of those experiences, like real world experiences, because what I always tell people, especially in the spiritual community, is that, for me, I feel like love and light or enlightenment is when you can see the shadow elements of society. And
mm,
so going back to school, going to the different communities that have been harmed by things such as colonialism and capitalism, to me, that was a vital part of my spiritual awakening, what have you, and my healing. And it also was very therapeutic for me because my dad was also very much into civil rights, and really fought for that within his workplace. And so I think that sort of allowed me to kind of tap into that grief of him not being here and being able to still connect with him spiritually through doing the advocacy work that I do. Um, and then it was also healing for me because I realized that all of these different identities that, for me, I mean, they've been, for me, it's like, it's not that we choose to hold these identities, these identities have been forced upon us.
mm,
It's sort of like, when all of these different social constructs were created based from a violent past and a violent root, we were forced into these to be compartmentalized, and like and so it's like, because we were forced to be compartmentalized into all these different identities, we literally like lost the true essence of the human self, right? Like we don't even really know what the human being really is because we're all so like stuck in these identities. So for me, when I was doing this work, and it wasn't just the material work of these studies and understanding the different social constructs, but then the healing aspect, right? Like the spiritual aspect of, I've been a practicing Buddhist for 11 years. It's Nichiren Buddhism. I'm a part of the SGI, Soka Gakkai International, which is based in Japan. So that was like the real root of my when my real like the real healing journey began, which was in 2010. Um, but then obviously after my dad passed, I mean, I started to get into different esoteric healing practices and modalities such as astrology, numerology, tarot, and then I started connecting with different groups in New York that were doing ancestral work, like ancestral healing, which was so vital for me. And it was such an important part of my healing journey. as a Black person, because obviously our ancestors, there's a lot of healing that has to be done from a lot of harm that has come to my ancestors. So when I was doing a lot of this ancestral healing, spiritual healing, I've worked with different archangels in the past, a part of this journey. And so, um, and it's just amazing because at first it was sort of weird because, you know, um, as a Black person, I feel like we've been so disconnected from spirituality because of colonialism and things like that, like true spirituality. Um, and so being able to like get back in touch with that, I was like, wow, like we were doing these things like before colonialism. Like,
Mm.
when I was really doing the research of African countries and of indigenous spaces, before colonialism, like we were already attuned with being in alignment with the universe, with being in alignment with Mother Nature. Like we were the caretakers of the earth. And so it was just such a beautiful experience. And I can't really tell you the exact date of this awakening, but it was when I connected those dots, I said, whoa, okay. And I'm getting chills right now. But, it's like, that's when basically under connecting this, I call it connecting the spiritual with the material. So it was like
Mm.
when I connected those two um aspects of self and of my personal experience and of the experience of BIPOC folks, it was like, wow, like this is having these two things fused together, you really have a deeper understanding of what's going on in the world, and you have a deeper understanding that actually change is possible, like, and not in like the the corny sense of where we see people in the status quo saying change is possible. Like, I'm like, no, I really mean like when we're able to come to tap into our spiritual essence, that's when you're able to see like I'm a human being, like I'm more than the identities that I hold.
Mm.
Like I'm not just this identity, and then you're able to see, oh, okay, I see these social constructs that were placed upon me. I'm not going to place blame on myself. I'm going to actually hold space for empathy for that and say, wow, like, so I understand why I may, you know, be in this victimhood mentality at times, because this identity was placed upon me that I'm not supposed to be better than someone else, and or I'm not supposed to elevate to a certain level, because other people are supposed to hold that place. Like when you have that spiritual element within, like in my opinion, within doing the advocacy work and a lot of that, you're really able to see things from truly a higher perspective. And I think that's really the root of like the empathic realist. It's just like it's understanding the human experience of being of creating systems because of having low vibrational energy. I mean, like that's literally what we could say. Like if we want to say, for example, creating colonialism, like it was based in greed and profit. Like that's what it was all about. And then they decided to treat other human beings as less than, right? Like that's a human condition, right? Like that's a part that can be a part of the lower conditioning. And so it's like, okay, well, you understand that, and it's like, but we can change it now, right? Like if we have the ability to be that low, we have the same ability to be that high,
Mm.
when it comes to our conditioning and how we want to be with each other and with ourselves in the world. So yeah, I mean, and the other thing is I created this platform just so that it was another alternative, right? Because a lot of, you know, the spiritual community is in one pocket, and then like advocacy work, is in like pockets where it's polarized. And
Mhm.
it's like, I was like, and so for me, I'm like, I don't identify with like polarized, advocacy work at all. Like that's just not, I don't, that's, I just don't, I don't vibrate there. So for me, I'm like, there's got to be something where I can, you know, uh, fuse these two elements of understanding the suffering, but also understanding like our potential as human beings. So
Mm. Gosh, this is like so amazing because I mean I love that you took that whole big picture of like going both to the, colonizers and the colonized, and holding space and like really like feeling. I'm assuming there, I guess, or I'm projecting that there is like feeling that like within you, and almost like an embodiment of different forms of suffering. And I think too, like what I'm hearing a lot of is, um, in a lot of ways, like I don't know if you're familiar with like vertical development, but almost the realms of development of our consciousness that we go through collectively. So that
Mhm.
collectively, like we were in this place of, comparison, hierarchy, conformity, fragmentation. And I think we're, as a culture, kind of reaching more of a capacity for a more expanded place of consciousness, so that we can kind of see more and hold more. And I think more and more people are coming online
Right.
to, I don't need to be in all these boxes. And I, in one of my last podcasts, that this woman, she always says, like, of course we felt victimized by it. And it's like, of course, like, that's the way that we've been evolving. So like it's, and I think it's so powerful and expanding to when you can get that recognition that I don't have to be in these boxes. And
Mhm.
it takes, I think, both, like what you're saying, like the shadow and the light, right? Like that there is the like kind of composting of those boxes and filling into that expansiveness. And
Mhm.
those boxes can be so limiting and so traumatizing, to what we can become. And and I feel like that is like the work in the world. And I'm hearing too, in some ways, what you're sharing about like your father and connecting into your ancestral line. It's like the ancestors are calling us forward now to heal the ancestral wounds of our past, and to awaken to I continuously, as I do like my own inner work, I am like continuously amazed by how many of the stories or the ways I've shown up as a victim have been passed down through my family.
Mhm.
And and to see it in the multi generations, and to think about like how far does that actually go back.
Mhm.
um and being a mother, like it's so vital to me to think about the future generations and to heal this in me. It's like, I use this metaphor of being the oysters of the ocean right now. Like,
Yeah.
how do we take in all the stuff and filter it in us so that we can create the new possible world? And oh yeah, I'm curious about, like, so what is your platform, and how are you welcoming more people into this like space of healing? Or I guess, how do you help people awaken to maybe composting this box mentality and
Right.
opening up to their spiritual essence? And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like right, I mean what I've been doing for the last 2 years, like um I used to host conversations. I had a podcast and where I was bringing on different people from the community of different sectors, educators, spiritual people, and we would just have conversations of how through our own talents like we're able to awaken people to understand like really what's going on in our world and like a lot of the harm and like the roots of that harm so that people can understand like this is how it started because I'm like at the root of the empathic realist is getting to like literally the root causes of situations in the collective, so that people can have a clear understanding of how this came to be so that also we can understand that it doesn't have to always be that way.
Hmm.
And so I was hosting conversations, and then I've, been asked to write different article pieces just about, for like my experience, like, because I worked in advertising marketing for over 10 years, like in New York. That was my like corporate career. And obviously, I faced a lot of racial and social injustices, in many of those places. Um, And so, so that's what, again, I have like this unique experience because I've really been deeply involved in a lot of the flaws of the
Mm.
system and experience them. So I basically, speak about these things on my platform via writing or public speaking. I get asked to do different public speaking engagements. Because for me, the Empathic Realist, it's like an educational platform, so um, at some point I'm probably going to be doing workshops in the future, but for now I'm just basically doing this work through writing, different article pieces, public speaking, and then yeah, talking to cool people like you, and doing different
Yeah.
podcasts and things like that. It's definitely in its infancy, um, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And yeah, and I'm being very cautious with this platform because it's I'm because I always want to make sure that not only am I honoring my ancestors, but I'm honoring my communities. I hold both African and Indigenous roots, so doing this work, and because it's the type of work that's not really out there, where you're intersecting different elements with the intention of creating new possibilities, right? So there's got to be a lot of empathy and care that's taken to the work that I do. So I'm allowing spirit to just flow through me, and it's like whatever they want me to be of service in when it comes to this platform, like I'm always open and ready to do more. So,
Mm. I love the deep listening.
mhm,
And like something that I've become more aware of is the way that we heal these cultural shadows is to bring them more into the light and to, get that, you know, just to bring more eyes, more awareness to it. And I feel like that's really helpful because I think one of had this like really beautiful conversation with a good friend of mine of like, how do we help these different, social groups that have been marginalized in the past? Because I think part of the issue is these boxes that they've been placed into by society. Um, like people, I want to say this is like, it's like terrible that they have like a comfort level of like, oh, like I know this box, I know this is how this box has been for me. I've seen my parents in this box, I've seen my grandparents in this box, and really bringing light to that that's not a healthy box to be in, and it doesn't need to continue to be that way. And
mhm,
I think even just seeing that can be really empowering of like, oh, like there, I mean, just knowing that, yeah, I don't have to keep like that story doesn't mean to continue to write my life.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point, and a lot of the reasons why, we stick to those stay within those boxes is just because it's a comfort zone. It's a conditioning. Like I think of because a lot of my other work also involves, speaking out about capitalism, which was the child of, colonialism and imperialism. And so um, I think what's really most important, and that's like what one of the goals of my platform is for people to understand that, you know, there's a level of conditioning that's preventing our healing, you
Mm,
know. For example, like last November, I was asked to host a conversation on food and colonialism, right? And because I've been fortunate to have studied with Dr. Vandana Shiva, who was one of the pioneers of this movement, and when I hosted that conversation, a lot of people at the end were like, I had no idea that, like the reason colonialism existed was because Europeans, they wanted to find the spice route to India, like they wanted it's like such they're like the origins of colonialism, it's so minute as to why it actually started. Like
mm,
it like literally it was because they wanted, they wanted more control when it came to food and and material trade, because Africa and the country of India, they were the profitable places. Like if you look at the GDP of certain countries in Africa and in India prior to colonization, their GDP was like out of the roof. They were profiting so much. Like they were able to sustain themselves. They were it's just, it's mind blowing. And so I think, you know, there's got to be a point to where we sort of look understand that a lot of times our individual suffering is as a result of collective issues, you know. um Even if you look at like patterns within different families, like even looking at, like my family, looking at different patterns, like a lot of times that's because of collective things that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think about the Black community and like me, being raised and thinking about those different social behaviors and social constructs that were not healthy. And a lot of times, for example, for a lot of people in the Black communities, because we had to find ways to survive because literally our lives depended on it. And so, um, and I think also too, it's understanding that we're missing an epicenter of empathy. Like that's where the empathic part comes into my platform, because that's where the spiritual element comes in, because it's like, okay, we have to understand, like, for example, if I when I first started this platform, I got a lot of pushback from white people, where people were, saying, oh, well, slavery happened a long time ago, and oh, well, you got to find a way to get, to stop being a victim and all these things. And I'm like, yeah, but where's your healing work? Because your ancestors did a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's like having empathy and understanding that you personally, like as a white person, like you didn't do something personally to me, right? However, it's the ancestry, like it's that your ancestry created a very harmful and toxic and violent system that we now all in some way, shape, or form are being negatively affected by, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's, for me, what I hope and wish for in like the spiritual community is like more accountability on like real world issues, like in the tangible, because I'm all about going to the 5D. However, like, you know, it, it's funny, like, because I am very spiritually connected and I work with different, deities and things like that. And it's funny because it's like literally what they're trying to get people to understand is like, there's so much work we still have to do. Like, there is like, our ancestors they've chosen us to come to this earth at this time to like literally unravel all of this nonsense, And so, like, will we see 5D in this lifetime? I don't think so. However, like, we chose to come here to clean up all the mess.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the Buddhism I practice, when we're chanting, we talk about like, in order to have that inner revolution, like as you're chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, you are expiating that karma, right? Like, so it's like a clogged, like a clogged pipe, right? Like if you have a clogged pipe, like in your sink or in your bathtub, and as you are clearing it out, it's like you're expiating that karma, right? So like that's what attracted me to that type of Buddhism that I'm still, practicing. And I think that's what we see happening now, right? Like all of this karma is coming to the surface and it looks ugly. It's not pretty. It's disgusting. It's not palatable. People want to move away from it. They want to avoid it. And it's like, listen, even, and this is what I'm saying, like, that's why a lot of times people have a hard time, going to therapy, even if they can afford it, and talking about these painful issues. And I think that's where the disconnect is happening on like a social level, because so many of us are hurting on a personal level. We don't even have the capacity to hold collective issues, right? Like, so I think that's the other part of the empathic realist. It's like, I'm very fortunate that I've had the financial opportunities to do a lot of my own inner healing work by having therapists and life coaches and things like that, And so for me having a platform, I'm like, I know certain people can't afford to have those things. So I want to hold a space to say, hey, it's okay that you're feeling the way that you do. More than likely, it's the system that's created this problem. So let's have conversations to figure out how we can change it, right? And so, and it's also too just to let people know, like, it's okay if you have your own inner work you need to do, right? Because I think a lot of times, like, if you try to do like, for in my opinion, if you try to do collective work while you still have like really deep inner work to do, it can be very complicated and conflicting. Because I know for myself, like, obviously being a marginalized person, like, I've always been in the trenches of advocacy work in some way, shape, or form. However, it wasn't until I did my like deep inner work, and like I always talk about how, being able to do like that deep unconditioning of like the colonial wounds that I hold, right? Like, of being seen as a lesser than human being, right? And things like that, like really digging deep to understand my worth and that I'm not these identities that have been placed upon me. Like when I really started doing that work, I'm saying, okay, now I can comfortably, really criticize the systems basically because, it's like, I know why you exist. I know why you still are trying to hold on to exist, right? And so I think, it's very, I don't say it's complicated. I always tell people it's layered like an onion, and it's like, first you have to peel back the layers of how the system has personally affected you, right? Like just on an individual level, like how you've had to succumb to the systems that be. And then you can start peeling back the other layers of the collective issues and then the ancestral issues. So it's a layered process. And so I think me hosting like this platform will allow other people to find ways to host it in their own way, because it's not, I can't alone do this. Like, it takes a village. It takes all of us to if there's something you hear me say, then you can take that back to your community and try to create a new way. You know what I'm saying? Because like, for example, when I hosted that conversation on food and colonialism, it was to bring about awareness and then, have people maybe quite like understand, like, oh, maybe I don't need to buy all this unhealthy food, like finding ways to disconnect from that system, because when we don't participate in this system, they have no choice but to tailor to what we actually want, until we have the power to start making our own decisions, like really, and like doing things more on a local level. I'm really speaking about food here, like community gardens and, working locally with your farms and things like that. But, so when I had that conversation, it's just, people can go back and say, oh, maybe I can get involved with some local community gardening or, working with the indigenous community of the lands that I'm on, and things like that. And then seeing if you can support, I don't, trying to work with your community to see how you can go about, where they go about finding ways to eliminate food deserts in your area, because that's a huge problem, especially in the United States, and especially with in poor Black, BIPOC areas and poor white areas, so it's just, because to me, it's like, for example, I was having this conversation with my friend a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about the image of Jesus Christ, right? Like how he has, I mean, he has been, he's been whitewashed because he wasn't white in his actual incarnation, right? Like he was, Black, Middle Eastern, like he was African, Middle Eastern, like those are the identities that he held, and he was not liked in his time, like he was a true revolutionary. I mean, he literally was killed, like for his teachings, for what he was trying to do. And I was telling my friend, I'm like, you know people, it's so interesting how religion, for example, which to me is not the same thing as spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
it's another social construct, and we it's another type of conditioning where it's like, we honor this entity. However, if he was still alive, or if he were alive today, like, he would be flipping more tables, seeing how we are treating each other and seeing how we're treating the earth. And for me, along my spiritual journey, like, I think a big part of it is like trying to find ways to disconnect from the harmful system, like not buying from Amazon, and just doing, I mean, just different things, and buying local. Like, I compost. I'm able to compost where I'm at now in Texas, and you know it's just doing different things, little things here and there to try to disconnect. But my friend and I, we were laughing because it was like people put Jesus Christ up on like this pedestal, and as if he wasn't like a rebel in his time, and the same thing of Dr. Martin Luther King. Like, people, they come out one day a year, post this, quote of him, and to me it's so annoying because I'm like, like, I always honor his work every day. I mean, but it's a part of what I do, my decolonial work. But it's like we have to really start understanding, like, what are we really doing? Like, are we just doing things for show, or like, do we really like have a deep, desire to make actual change? Because it's like like, for example, like, I remember I canceled like all of my subscriptions, like, to save money, and to just, and I'm okay. Like, I don't need to have the subscriptions, and just different things here and there, and being open, again, being open to the possibilities, because I think conditioning, it limits your mind, right? Like, for example, I'm thinking of like astrology, and I tend to intersect a lot of my decolonial work with astrology, just because it also, it's another way, like, spirituality that helps me see, like, things that are going on. Like, for example, like, Pluto's in Capricorn right now, and Capricorn, and I'm a Capricorn, so sun, and Capricorn is all about the government structures. Like, I also say that it's capitalism, and it's the employer employee dynamic, it's the celebrity, it's fame, it's the government bodies, it's the president, right? Like, it's the White House, and um and Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth. It's the planet of, transformation. It's the planet of taxes, of shared resources. So that would be like, government assistance programs and things like that. And it's the planet of the taboo. It's the planet of the deep underworlds, like the deep underlying issues that are going about. It's the planet of manipulation, like, that's a shadow element. So Pluto being there right now, like, we're seeing all of that shadow coming out in our systems, and it happened to be this thing that's invisible, right? I'm not going to say what it is, but that thing that's invisible right now, that's going around and has been since 2020, um, is is um is really shining a light on, like, the issues of our world, and in particularly in the United States, also known as Turtle Island. It is shining a light, and that's what Pluto does. You don't want to see it. You don't want to see the things in the dark that are in the corner, right? Like a dusty corner. You don't know what's there. You don't want to see that. But Pluto's like, I'm sorry. We've got to see all these issues going on within things connected to Capricorn, which is all these structures. That's why, to me, I always say that Pluto in Capricorn right now is like, it's a changing of the guards. So, like, the empire is dying. It's like slowly crumbling and buckling and self imploding, in my opinion. And so I think it's that much more important to, in a way, like, disconnect from it, and like organize with community, and like really talk about the ways that, like, this system has harmed everybody, and understanding its roots, to honor, the Black and Indigenous experience, because I think that's very important, within spiritual work as well. But then also understanding too that from there, again, like I said before, like, harming all of us, because the most powerful thing you can do is organize. Like that's what they always we talk about in like our advocacy circles. Like that is the most powerful thing you can do is actually organize, and on a community level. Like that's why they create ways, and being someone that worked in advertising for over 10 years, like I was a part of that system because advertising is a big part of that, because you are putting things in people's faces so that they don't focus on what's really going on, you know and so it's like you keep people numb, you keep people distracted, and because United States is the country of overconsumption, for example. Like we are one of the countries with one of the most food waste. Like there's just so many different things, and so there's so many different elements out there that keep us distracted, right? It keeps our energy splintered, when it's like that's where I think spirituality is really important, because it's when you can turn off that outside noise and really center yourself, and really listen and hone in, like, what is my life mission? Even if there's capitalism involved, right? Like, and because I mean, there's a lot of suffering happening, even on the financial, front right now, and with the economy and jobs. But it's like even taking one moment to like center yourself and say, okay, what do I really want to do in this world?
Mm.
What in what way do I really want to contribute, to healing the community in some way? And it's like having that time to slow down and really like think about that without any of the outside noise. And I think that was a big part of my healing journey. Like one of the first things I did was I got rid of my TV, and I canceled my cable and like all of that stuff, and I noticed like this shift, and that's when I started getting all these downloads. And I
Mm.
was just like writing every day, and and being like, oh, okay, this is before the empathic realist came to be, and I was just formulating everything and like, oh, okay, so this, okay, and and that's when I started having all these awakenings. And I think, yeah, so I think that it's just so important. I don't know, like just to really find ways to turn out the outside noise, to really get centered, to understand who you really are without the labels, without what society wants you to be, and then find like-minded people that want to be a part of that movement, and want to really make change. I know that
Mm.
was a lot, but I'm just like, whoo, coming through.
Let it flow. I mean, you got that's big. I mean, I think one of the things that really came alive in me and sharing is this like radical responsibility for, because it's like you got to shut down
Mm.
the external voices, but then there's also like these internal voices. And like you're saying, it's like some of them are like with what's coming, almost like the soil of our society and these structures are like
Yes,
being tilled right now. Like there's this
yes.
like kind of unearthing. And in the unearthing, it's like some more awareness and awakening to the ugly parts, whether they're in
Yes.
societal or I think both. It's like in the structures of our society and in the ancestral wounds that have been passed through us,
Oh yeah.
of like, well, what are those voices that are inside of us? But maybe both black and white, of this like what are like my, colonizing, you know, voices that like lived in my grandmother, like lived in my parents,
Right.
and
Yeah.
how do I like I feel like there's so much of like, oh no, I'm not racist, or I don't have, this. And it's like
Yeah.
I'm gonna, throw this under the carpet. And like, but like if the voice pops up, or if like even, anything that like
Trigger.
comes alive,
Yeah.
it's like, can
Yeah.
I can I be more present and take radical responsibility of like, okay, like, well, and get curious, like, where does that
Yeah.
come from? Is that me? I think like I really love this thought too of spirituality intertwined in advocacy, because I think
Mhm.
there is a lot of charge in the internal ancestral wounds that we're all carrying. I mean, that's kind of why we're here, why we want to change in a lot of ways. And I think it can be really hard to be, am I looking through the lens of my wound, or am I like
Yeah.
really coming from a place of like clarity and like creating like the new world in the way that holds realistic empathy for everyone, like and I think until you build that inner listening, um let's say like kind of like muscle memory, right? Like until you build
Yeah.
that like inner listening,
Once
muscle.
you clean out the wounded parts of the self, right?
Yeah.
Then you can like it's like clearing out that, all of the chakras really, but that heart centered and that throat chakra, and the third eye, right? It's like when you're clearing those three, it's like then you're able to like see through that unfiltered lens, right?
Yeah.
And I love what you said about the radical responsibility.
Hmm. I'm
I
curious,
think
like,
that,
oh,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh,
No, go ahead, go
I was just
ahead.
gonna say, I'm curious in like your process, and maybe even like, especially with marginalized communities, like, are there particular ways that, or techniques or methods that really helped you kind of metabolize some of these, fragmentations and boxes and things that you once held, that your family has held, and like where, like if someone's like on the show like listening, it's like, well, like where could they get started, or how could they start to unpack these identities?
Right. I mean, I think the most important thing, which I think I may have mentioned earlier, is just like really understanding that you're not the identities like that
Mm.
you hold. That's just like one aspect of the human experience. Like in many ways we hold these identities because there's sort of like this work to be done of healing, right? But then at the end of the day, it's like that is one part, but that's not really who I am. Like, who are you really beyond the labels? Like, that would be, I would just ask that question, like, because that's what I did to myself. It's like, who
Mm.
are you beyond the labels that are placed upon you? And then the second thing would just be, what do you really want to do, in the world? Like, a big part of the journey for me was re tapping into my inner child. Since I was young, I started remembering that I loved writing. Like I loved writing. That was one of the things I loved to do. I mean, that's why I'm like, since I moved back to Texas now, I've been like going through different papers that I wrote, like going to my mom's storage, and I was like, oh my God. But like, I loved writing. I loved singing. I mean, the other thing people may not know, like, I was a professional singer for about 10 years. And so those are like two of the things I love to do. And so, you know, while obviously singing is a difficult thing to do full time, I know that writing is something that I can easily try to find a way to make to make a living off of, but it's just really it's understanding who you are beyond the labels, and then from there it's sort of working with your inner child, because it's like always. I remember I was in a workshop last year virtually, and they were talking about um looking at children for inspiration, because they don't see anything, like they really see the world through an unfiltered lens in many
Yes.
cases, because I just think about myself. Like I remember when I was very young, I just had so much energy, and I was like, I want to change the world, and and like I want to do it this way, this way, this way, and then of course the ancestral work comes in, right? It's like we start as we get older. It's like the ancestors come knocking and say, okay, but there's this work
Mm.
that needs to be done. And so, but I think just trying to see if there's a way you can do inner child healing, I think is so important. Because then you're able to really tap into the innocence of yourself, and understand that there's a purity about all of us. I
Mm.
think that was the most important thing for me to learn, especially because my healing journey involved a lot of heavy things that I was going through. And so I took time and just really understood, like, what did my inner child want? And that's when I went back to school for the colonialism degree, because I love learning. I love school, like I always have. and and so it's doing that. And then I think also it's just, and it's not, whenever I'm having these conversations, I don't want people to feel overwhelmed, because it is a lot, and that's why I hold space that I do on the Empathic Realist, because I understand it's a lot. And I think it's just taking it one step at a time of doing the inner healing work. Because for
Mm.
me, once you do that inner healing work, then you can really start seeing things from a different perspective, you know. And I also think too, just not relying on like the system to save you.
Mm,
That's, I know that's a really like, you know, uncomfortable thing to hear, but
mm,
it's just, but it's in my, it's the truth. Like you can't allow the system to save you. And I also think too, like we have to stop sort of, you know, idolizing these people, you know, because it, for me, it takes away from your own magic, you
mm.
know. And look, I'm somebody that I was in the whole boy band craze, so like I get it, you know. Like I won't say which one, but I
Oh, come on.
was, okay, okay, okay. In sync, in sync. Okay, okay, okay. I guess. um, but what I'm saying is, it's. I mean, of course, it's cool to like admire people, or you know. But I think that we get so carried away, right? Like we're in this celebrity culture, and
Mm,
like, and for me, what I've realized is, in some respect, like it takes away from my magic because I'm like, I can, you know, I'm just as talented, right, in whatever I want to, in whatever I want to do. And so I think it's also understanding that, don't fall for like these false dichotomies of like what you see in the
mm,
public eye, you know, because it's a false perception and it's not reality. And create your own reality, you know.
mm. I love your touching on the inner child. I have a 6-year-old
Oh
who,
yes,
like,
yes, yes.
yeah, like, so it's such a beautiful reminder because she just hasn't absorbed yet the full, or has no concept of the social constructs, and often says inappropriate things, at the
Yeah,
perfect time, and it's like, because she doesn't understand, and everyone else is looking through this lens of the social construct, and she's just kind of like there's so much
yes,
freedom because social
yeah,
construct doesn't exist. And
exactly.
I think there's also this piece of when all the constructs aren't limiting and literally creating some kind of rigid structure that you're allowing yourself to participate in.
Yeah.
You There is a level of freedom to our spirit that we forget, like that ease in our body of when we're creating and enjoy, and like that actually is a natural state of being that is good. Like, I think that a lot of that has been like demonized, shamed,
Oh yeah.
like looked as lazy, or you're not as like we've come up in a very like hard
That's
working
capitalism,
culture.
by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
Capitalism. Yeah, I mean, I think I just, yeah, I mean, I mean, I guess I'll just end here where it's just, I think, again, it's sort of like, if I want to leave people with one thing, it's this. It's to understand that, like, the systems have placed a certain amount of value on you and your human existence that is unrealistic and is not true, right?
Mm,
So, you know, you are more than the job you have, you know, you are more than whatever labels people place on you.
mm,
Um, and I think intersecting the spiritual element into someone's work allows you to have a connection with the universe and the source so that you can reconnect with your magic, right? Reconnect with your real worth, your real value, you know,
mm,
because at the end of the day, the only person that can validate you is yourself,
mm,
you know. Um, Nobody else can. Don't try to hold yourself up to other people's expectations. Um, you know, believe that you can create the reality in which you want to attain, you know, and that in many respects, by doing that, you can also open a pathway to finding ways that you can support other communities when it comes to a lot of these social constructs.
mm,
Because when you are able to see your real magic, you're able to say, okay, well, how can I be of service, you know, to those in my community, even if it's one person, that you can change their life. So understand that you're more than whatever labels have been placed upon you. You're here with a mission and a purpose, and accessing that inner child will probably be the best guiding post for you. And at the end of the day, all of the things that are happening in the collective at this moment, they're meant to be happening. So don't fret, don't be scared. We came here at this time to either be of witness to it or be a part of the change to it, you know? And so it's like, just be there to, just be ready to, if people need to be caught, like as the things are falling, you're there and say, hey, how can I be of service to you? You know? So, yeah, I mean, I think that's what I would sort of like to leave with today. And, yeah, that the systems are meant to be falling right now. So it's an uncomfortable thing. And just, that's why I think meditation and, really, finding ways to be of service to yourself right now is so important. Um, yeah.
Mm. I guess I have a question alive in me I want to
Oh,
presence
sure.
is like I guess maybe advice, or if you have ways like for people who are in advocacy, how could they bring more spirituality like into their work?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think well, I mean, my journey was literally was being a Buddhist, like becoming a Buddhist. I think that was really important for me, to have that spiritual daily practice, because something I tell other folks that are deep in this work, who also happen, especially if they're also empaths like myself, um, or sensitive beings. I think it's just important to realize that, you know, there's a mystical element, to life, you know,
Mhm.
um, and in many respects, again, like, we chose to be here at this time with these identities so that we can heal all of these wounds, right?
Yes.
And I would just say that, if there's a way that you can incorporate, meditation practices, um, or finding a way to, again, tune out the outer noise, because sometimes in advocacy work we can be so deep into it, because I know, because I myself, I understand it. And so it's sometimes important to understand that, like, we can't do it all. We can only do what we can do. And I think that's what I had to realize for myself. Like, I can only do so much. Like, this is my work that I'm doing, and I'm also balancing keeping myself centered and aligned, which is where the spirituality comes in. People don't have to become a Buddhist. It's just having some sort of spiritual connection to the divine, um, is definitely vital to doing advocacy work, because the thing is, we can take on a lot of that heavier energy, and so when you're doing meditation work, spiritual work, you're able to release all that heavy energy so that you
Mhm.
can still be in tune of who you are. Even if that means, if you're not into meditation or anything like that, just taking a, a salt bath, every night
Yes.
or
Yeah.
once a week, or, grounding on the earth, sitting outside, taking in the rays, and asking the sun to transmute any energies that aren't yours, and to give it back, or to Mother Gaia, like, incorporating, I think, I'll just say this, incorporating Mother Nature in some way. Because
Mm.
to me, I think once you develop a connection to Mother Nature, even if you don't believe in, spiritual, or, anything like that, like connecting to Mother Nature is real, it's keeping us alive. So developing a connection to her, and understanding that, again, like, everything that's happening is meant to be happening, and we can't save everyone. We can only do the best that we can.
Mm. I think I love the part about like grounding, because I find the more I more awareness I have of myself, and being a highly sensitive person, have always
Yeah.
been a highly sensitive person, I don't think I had the awareness of like how much I truly absorb from my environment, and being
Yes.
able to discern within me like how much is this me, or me just feeling my environment, or me feeling
Right.
others. And I think it's just knowing advocacy work, like how much tension can be felt when you're up against like change and creating change. Like there's a lot of other people's wounds that are involved. It's a lot of
Yeah.
other people like coming together to be involved in creating that. And then there's these ancestral wounds that are coming together. So it's like a
Yeah.
really like highly tensioned, turmoiled space that
Yeah.
does, I think, like the more grounded and centered people can, build practices to come from their truth versus getting caught up in the energy of the space is, yeah, it's a really important factor.
Yeah. And even I think like, something that I plan on, incorporating this year is, putting some sort of meditation practice before starting that advocacy work so
Mm.
that it's like everybody is aligned and on like the same page, right? With understanding what the root intention is behind it. I think because that's something I talk about too sometimes is how we're at a stage now where we have to really re-strategize like advocacy work,
Mm.
and like to really, and I think that's maybe where the spiritual element comes in. Um, when you're really understanding like the root of why everyone is there, what's the intention, what's what is the intention behind what we're doing and what we're fighting for.
Mm. Love that.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm curious if you want to share, like, how can listeners get in touch with you or find more about you?
Oh,
um,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, empathic_realist. And if you just type in the empathic realist on Google, I think my website's probably there and probably my Instagram, maybe Facebook, but that's the easiest way people can find me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll include that in the notes so people can get in touch with you.
Thank you.
Oh,
This
thank
is
you.
awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, for asking me to be here and for diving deep with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the wisdom. You can find more recordings, classes, and events on mystics-rising.com.